Hello, this is Mark Sabatella from Outside Shore Music. In this video, I want to talk about a subject that came up recently within the Outside Shore Music community, and it has to do with the idea of a chord voicing that has the interval of a second on top. Like this chord here, you see we have a D and a C on top. The next chord I have a D and E on top. Next one I have an E and F on chord on top. Now, the existence of the second itself, not a problem at all. These are all seventh chords. These are minor seventh chords. That's a major seventh chord. I guess if I added another one here, let's go ahead, another one, and this one will be a dominant seventh chord on top, F to G. These are fine chords in themselves. But let's talk about the placement of that second. First of all, let me just go ahead and play this on the piano. I'm just going to play it myself. So, on the piano, this is a fine voicing if you're accustomed to kind of jazzy sounds where we have a lot of seventh chords like this, and we might put the seconds on top of a voicing. Not necessarily a problem. But let's talk about why sometimes, at least, this might be a problem. So one is, if you're not at all accustomed to a jazz type of a sound, you're going to reject a lot of sevenths, most likely. Sevenths in classical music and in pop music tend to be used more sparingly. So you might say, well, let's just not even have those sevenths on some of these chords, maybe only on that G7 chord there. So that could be a reason not to do that. And it is the presence of the seventh of the chord that creates that second. It's the seventh of the chord against the root. So if you don't really want to have a seventh on the chord, get rid of the seventh and you're not going to have a second anywhere in it. So that's great. But what if you're like, well, I like the seventh sometimes, but I'm not so sure about this. Why might we care other than that? Well, one thing is, if this is meant to be sung and the top note is the melody, often we avoid putting another vocal part or even an instrumental part a second below the melody. In fact, we might do it even if it's an instrumental. On piano, for some reason, we don't tend to reject it at all. But if this was, say, scored for 4 trumpets or, for instruments of whatever other type, often we might avoid putting that second below the melody note on top. It's especially true, though, if they're voices. We often avoid putting that second on top just because it's a little dissonant, sure, but also it might make it a little hard to actually hear and sing those notes in tune when someone else is singing another note a step away from you. So that's one thing. Another thing to consider is in instrumental music especially, we might be using a lot of these kinds of sounds, but often there's a bias against the minor second specifically. So this chord here that has a minor second, as opposed to the others, which were major seconds, right? These chords all have major seconds on top. That's more often considered okay, and the minor second on top is more often considered problematic. You'll notice that I'm being very vague here about, well, it might be. That's because this all is very subjective. And you'll hear people say, well, in my world, this is how I do things, or this is how I think you should do things. I'm not telling you how you should do things, but I'm definitely telling you the things to be on the lookout for. Seconds on the top of a voicing are a potential point of concern. So you think about, A, do I want the second at all? Is it, given my instrumentation, is it okay to have it on top, or would it be better to voice the chord in a way where it's in the middle? If it's the melody note and it's a vocal thing, maybe you try to avoid it, and maybe you think differently about major seconds than minor seconds. I don't have answers for any of those. Those are the questions you ask yourself when you're writing music. You think about, hey, there's a second on top, and then consider these factors, listen to it for yourself, decide, is this second on top going to be okay or not? Your call, totally your call.